Under a burning sky, a humble rancher discovers two towering women unconscious on the desert floor, giants from a tribe few have ever seen. Through the long night, he fights to keep them alive, but with sunrise comes destiny. The chief arrives with warriors stretching across the horizon, and in a voice that echoes through the canyon, he declares a decision so bold it could alter the fate of both giants and settlers forever. The desert yawned beneath a bleeding dawn, vast and merciless, the sand rippling like molten gold under the first light. Wind whipped across skeletal dunes, carrying whispers of old storms and long, forgotten travelers. Illy Mercer's horse moved with the weariness of a man who had counted the stars one too many nights, hooves crunching dry earth that cracked beneath the rising sun. His eyes, sunburned and shadowed with years of solitude, scanned the horizon, cattle missing, hope thinning like morning mist. Heat shimmered over the land, distorting shapes, turning rocks into distant specters, turning his own shadow long and trembling. And then beyond a ridge where the sand lay untouched, perfect as a canvas he saw them, two immense forms half buried unmoving, giants human yet impossibly vast, sprawled in the sand as if the earth itself had flung them there. Illy's heart constricted. The wind, sharp with the smell of dust and sun-baked clay, carried the faint metallic tang of something else, blood or perhaps fear. The vultures wheeled overhead, their shadows slicing the dunes like knives. Every instinct screamed to turn away, to leave the impossible behind. But his boots moved forward before his mind could object, each step heavy with disbelief and dread. Closer now, he saw the details, hair like dark waves of midnight spilling over sand, skin sun-kissed but marred by scratches and bruises, chests rising and falling with shallow, uneven breaths. They were alive. And yet they were lost, abandoned by the desert or hunted to its edge. Illy knelt beside them, hands shaking, unsure whether mercy or madness guided him. He poured water from his flask over cracked lips, whispering words the wind carried off before they could land. Time slowed. The sun climbed, harsh and unrelenting, casting long shadows over the giants' forms. A coyote's howl broke the silence, echoing off distant mesas like a warning. Illy felt the weight of choice pressing down, heavier than the noon sun. Ride on and survive, or stay and risk everything for two souls not his own. And as he brushed sand from a massive hand, the faintest flicker of recognition crossed the giant's closed eyes, a pulse of life, a whisper of trust. The horizon shivered with heat, and in that trembling light Illy made his unspoken vow. He would not abandon them, not today. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of distant fires, and somewhere beyond the dunes shadows moved. Illy pulled his hat lower, tightened his grip on the reins, and began the impossible task of lifting two giants into the world that had nearly forgotten them. The sand shifted under Illy's boots, fine grains clinging to sweat, soaked leather, as he struggled to move the giants. Their limbs were heavy, impossibly heavy, yet pliant in the way the living are, refusing to obey gravity until guided with care. Every motion sent a shiver through his arms and shoulders, a silent testament to the burden he had willingly claimed. The sun rose higher, igniting the desert in a haze of fire and gold, and the vultures circled closer, curious, impatient, as if the sky itself waited for judgment. He spoke to them in soft tones, words that carried no meaning yet conveyed intent. Tea's eyelids fluttered, catching the sunlight like dark sails trembling against wind. Nara's chest heaved, shallow but steady, as if the desert itself had lent her life back in small, fragile breaths. Illy's mind reeled with awe and fear. These were not creatures of myth, they were flesh, bone, and spirit, caught at the edge of survival, and in this moment they were his responsibility. A sudden gust of wind swept across the dunes, sand biting his face, eyes watering. He shielded the giants, holding their heads against his chest, whispering prayers older than memory. The world was silent except for the hiss of wind and the distant caw of scavengers. Yet in that silence, a heartbeat thrummed theirs, his, the desert's. It was fragile, yet undeniable. Step by agonizing step, Illy dragged them toward the line of rocky outcrops that marked the edge of the open plain. Every movement threatened to topple them, yet every pause was a temptation for despair. He imagined what lay ahead: the barn, the fire, the water, yet even that vision trembled beneath the enormity of the task. The giant's skin glistened with sweat and sand, their hair tangled with the desert itself, a living testament to endurance and suffering. When at last he reached the first shadowed rocks, Illy collapsed against the warm stone, chest heaving, arms trembling. The giant's breathing steadied, Taya's hand brushing his arm in a motion so slight it almost seemed imagined. In that gesture, a fragile bridge was built between them, a trust earned in silence, a promise understood without words. The horizon bled with heat, dust rising like a shroud around the outcrops, and Illy allowed himself the briefest taste of hope. He would find shelter, he would keep them alive, whatever the desert demanded in return: loneliness, danger, perhaps death he would pay. The world beyond these dunes was cruel, yet for now, under the harsh morning sun and the endless sky, life persisted. As he gazed back toward the vast emptiness that had nearly claimed them, Illy felt a flicker of wonder mixed with dread. Two giants, unbroken despite the desert's cruelty, lay in the faint shadow of rocks, and he had chosen their fate as surely as the wind chose its course. Somewhere far beyond the dunes, unseen fires flickered. Men or beasts of another kind stirred. The choice he had made would not go unnoticed. And yet, as sweat dripped from his brow and the sun seared the world, Illy Mercer, weary rancher of nothing but dust and memory, knew one truth above all else. Mercy was a gamble, and he had thrown the dice. The desert held its breath, and the day began. Evening descended like a heavy quilt over Illy's lonely ranch, the last light of the desert bleeding gold into shadows that stretched long across the cracked earth. Inside his barn, the air smelled of hay, sweat, and the faint metallic tang of blood. The giants lay beneath patched blankets, the weight of their bodies pressing against the old wood floorboards. Their breathing was steady now, yet fragile, like the flutter of wings trapped in a storm. Illy sat by the fire, the flickering flames casting his weathered face into sharp relief, illuminating lines carved by years of solitude, loss, and stubborn survival. His hands, scarred from ropes, plows, and unforgiving work, shook slightly as he poured water into a tin cup, then set it beside the women. Silence draped the barn like a heavy curtain, yet it was not emptiness, it was anticipation, the quiet hum of life barely clinging to the edges of despair. The firelight drew him inward, and memories rose unbidden, as relentless as the desert wind. He remembered his wife, Anna, laughing beneath a sky no less harsh, the way her hair caught the sunlight like molten copper. He remembered the day the desert took her, when the fever came and the world offered no mercy, and then their child, little Samuel, whose small hands had never grasped his own before the sickness claimed him. The walls of this barn had seen grief before, had heard silence weigh heavier than gunfire. Yet something about these women, their immense presence, their quiet trust, stirred a pulse he had thought long dead. Compassion, once a fragile ember, now flared uncertainly in his chest. He moved toward them, brushing sand from Taya's dark hair, her eyelids twitching in dreams he could not know. Nara murmured softly in a tongue alien to his ears, syllables shaped by desert winds and bloodlines older than the plains themselves. Illy knelt, letting the firelight catch the curve of her scars, tracing paths of survival etched into her skin. A question pressed at him: why had fate brought these giants here to his forgotten ranch, at this unforgiving hour of his life? The desert offered no answers, only the relentless echo of choices made and consequences borne. Outside, rain began to tap the tin roof softly, a rhythm that matched the slow return of his own heartbeat. The sound was a balm, a reminder that even the harshest land could offer small mercy. He tended their wounds with water, cloth, and oil, his touch careful, reverent. Each gesture felt like an unspoken apology for the lives he could not save in the past, each act of care a plea for redemption. As the storm whispered against the wooden walls, Illy's mind wandered to the neighbors who had once betrayed him, the men whose envy and greed had driven him to the edge of ruin. He remembered the bitter taste of loss, of seeing the land he loved stripped from his hands, the cold indifference of a world unwilling to forgive weakness. And yet, in this quiet barn, amidst two impossibly tall strangers whose trust he could not fully comprehend, he felt the faint stirrings of hope. Hope that even in the face of desert cruelty, compassion might still carve a path forward. Hope that the weight of the past, no matter how heavy, need not dictate the measure of his heart. And as night thickened, wrapping the barn in shadow, Illy Mercer whispered to the rain, to the giants, to the ghosts of his past, "Tomorrow we endure." Together, night deepened in the barn, thick and velvety, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the rain tapping like distant fingers on the roof. Illy moved silently among the giants, each step careful not to disturb their fragile rest. Taya's chest rose and fell with measured rhythm, Nara's murmurs soft and hesitant, almost like prayers carried on a language he could not know. He traced the curve of their arms, the arch of their shoulders, feeling the strength beneath the fragility, and marveled at how something so immense could still carry such delicate life. Memories pressed closer, shadows curling around the edges of his mind. He saw Anna again, her laughter a ribbon of light across a time long vanished. He saw Samuel, his small fingers reaching for a world that had no place for him. The desert had taken much land, family, hope yet in this barn, amidst the scent of hay and the soft groan of timber. It seemed to offer a second chance. Illy sat back, letting his hands rest on his knees, and listened to the soft breathing of the giants. He spoke nothing aloud. Words would have been clumsy, intrusive. Instead, he allowed his thoughts to wander, measuring the weight of mercy, of courage, of risk. He knew the world outside was unforgiving, that harboring these strangers would invite suspicion, anger, perhaps violence. Yet the thought of leaving them, of abandoning them to the desert's cruel embrace, was unbearable. He remembered the neighbors who had betrayed him, their eyes cold with envy as they seized what little he had left. He remembered the loss that had hollowed him, the nights spent staring at the stars, questioning the justice of the heavens. And now, with two giants sleeping beneath the firelight, he realized that survival alone was never enough. Compassion, he understood, demanded action even when it promised nothing but peril. The rain softened, turning into a whisper against the roof, carrying the scent of wet earth and possibility. Illy brought blankets closer, tucking them carefully around the giant's massive forms, his hands lingering on the fabric as if sealing a promise. He thought of what the desert might demand in return: solitude, struggle, danger, and knew he would pay the price without hesitation. In the quiet, a bond began to form, fragile yet undeniable. It was not friendship, not yet, but recognition, a shared understanding that survival was intertwined, that mercy given could echo in ways neither life nor death could erase. Illy felt a pulse of purpose, a quiet revival of a heart long numbed by grief. Outside, the storm faded into distant rumble, and the first hint of dawn brushed pale gold against the horizon. Illy remained by their side, aware that the world beyond the barn would soon intrude, bringing with it choices that could shatter this fragile sanctuary. But for these moments, he allowed himself a sliver of peace, a measure of hope, that even in a land shaped by cruelty, compassion could find root. And as the giants stirred in their dreams, shifting gently beneath the blankets, Illy Mercer whispered once more, to the rain, the night, and the desert itself, "We endure, together." Moonlight draped the barn in silver, fragile as frost, the shadows stretching long and trembling across haze-strewn floors. The giants stirred beneath the blankets, eyelids flickering like the wings of night birds. Taya's chest rose in shallow rhythm, a faint whimper escaping her lips, while Nara shifted beside her, murmuring words Illy could not understand, syllables that hung in the air like smoke, ancient and sacred. Illy knelt close, careful not to startle them, his hand hovering just above their skin. Every heartbeat echoed in the quiet, a drumbeat of tension, hope, and fear entwined. He had tended to their wounds, offered them water and warmth, yet their eyes when they opened would not see him as savior nor friend. They would see a stranger, a man from a world that had turned against them, and he knew he must earn trust without words. Taya's gaze met his first. It was a look heavy with disbelief, with fear sharpened by the desert's cruelty. Her pupils dilated, capturing the flickering firelight in a storm of emotions. Exhaustion, hunger, sorrow, and something primal, a wariness that only survivors bore. Nara followed, her expression a mirror of her sister's, yet softer, more hesitant, as if the world had not yet hardened her spirit entirely. They spoke then, voices low and trembling, broken by uncertainty, calling to each other in a tongue Illy could not name. Their hands moved in gestures, delicate and deliberate, as though language alone could not carry the weight of their history. Illy watched, deciphering meaning in motion, understanding through instinct. Water, safety, shelter. He nodded once, solemnly, feeling the gravity of their need press upon his chest like the desert's own weight. Outside, the wind whispered through cracks in the barn, carrying distant sounds, the howl of a coyote, the soft rustle of desert grass, and beyond, faint flickers of firelight on the horizon. Raiders, perhaps, or travelers long lost. The giants flinched at every distant sound, their muscles coiling like springs, the tension of survival etched into every fiber. Illy's jaw tightened. The desert was vast, yet it had already begun to close in around them. As the night deepened, Illy moved closer, offering water, gently coaxing them with gestures, repeating the same movements until Taya's hand brushed against his own, hesitant but deliberate. Nara mirrored her sister, fingers trembling as they reached for sustenance, and in that simple touch, an unspoken understanding passed between them. Here, in this fragile barn beneath the moon, there was a chance, perhaps the first in their lives, to breathe without terror. Yet the horizon remained restless. Distant fires flickered, tiny sparks against the black, like eyes watching, judging, waiting. Illy's chest tightened. He knew the desert would not forget them, would not forgive their intrusion into its harsh expanse. But in this moment, beneath silvered beams and quiet breath, life clung stubbornly, and the first seeds of trust, fragile and trembling, began to take root. The moon climbed higher, spilling pale silver across the barn, illuminating the giants' immense forms in soft, trembling light. Taya's eyes opened fully now, dark pools reflecting both fear and wonder, scanning the space around her as though the world itself might rise and strike at any moment. Nara shifted beside her, letting her gaze follow her sister's, a silent mirror of apprehension. Their hands reached instinctively toward each other, a tether in a world that had shown them nothing but loss. Illy remained perfectly still, understanding that trust could not be rushed. He offered water once more, pouring slowly into a tin cup, letting the gentle splash carry calm rather than command. Taya's lips touched it first, then Nara's, and with each sip, a quiet rhythm emerged, a fragile pulse of life reclaimed from the desert's unforgiving grip. And then the whispers began, low, quivering voices threading through the moonlit barn, words that spoke of terror, of blood spilled in the sands, of a massacre that had left them wandering alone. Illy could not understand the language, yet he felt it in his bones: grief, fear, survival. Each syllable was a weight, pressing him to listen, to bear witness. Their tears fell softly onto the wooden floor, glinting like tiny shards of glass in the firelight, and the barn seemed to hum with the sorrow of a world long gone. The giant's scars told a story as vivid as their voices. Long lines across arms and shoulders, faded burns and jagged cuts, each mark a testament to survival against impossible odds. Illy traced them with his eyes, sensing the resilience hidden within their immense bodies. They were not merely women, they were warriors, survivors of a cruelty that would have broken lesser souls. And yet, in this small, fragile shelter, they were vulnerable, human in their need for water, warmth, and mercy. Outside, the desert whispered of dangers yet to come. Fires flickered on the horizon, their distant glow promising either salvation or peril. The wind carried the scent of smoke and distant earth, and the giants stiffened, muscles taut as wire, eyes wide with the knowledge that they were being hunted. Illy's heart clenched. He had brought them to safety for the moment, yet the world beyond these walls remained merciless, relentless, and hungry. Slowly, through gestures and the occasional word, Illy pieced together fragments of their tale. Names, Taya and Nara, sisters, survivors. He saw the memory of blood on their faces, the echo of cries that had no one left to answer. Each revelation weighed on him, yet also ignited something he had thought extinguished: purpose. He would protect them, guide them, bear the risk, no matter the cost. By the time the first blush of dawn threatened the edges of the night, a fragile bond had taken root. Taya and Nara leaned slightly toward Illy, a subtle acknowledgement that their lives, for the first time in months, were intertwined with another's. Trust, born in silence and shadow, had begun to grow. And beyond the barn, beyond the dunes and flickering fires, the desert stirred restless, patient, and waiting. Illy Mercer, weary and haunted, understood one truth. The giant's story was now his to bear, and the choices he made in the coming hours would shape not only their lives but the fate of all who dared cross the desert's cruel expanse. The night draped the desert in velvet darkness, pinpricked by 1,000 indifferent stars. The barn, humble and creaking, held its breath, the shadows deepening in corners where light feared to tread. Illy Mercer moved like a ghost among the hay and timber, guiding the giants toward a hidden cellar beneath the barn floor. The entrance was narrow, just wide enough to slip 2 massive bodies through with effort, but it offered a sanctuary the world above could not see. Taya and Nara descended into the dim space, their eyes wide, scanning the low ceiling and rough, hewn walls. Every movement spoke of caution, of fear still clinging to their muscles. Yet there was also awe, the faint recognition that someone had chosen to protect them when the desert had chosen only to abandon. Illy knelt beside them, his hands tracing comforting gestures in the air, silent promises that he would not leave, that the world could not claim them tonight. Outside, coyotes howled their lonely chorus, the wind twisting sand into restless shapes that danced across the barn walls. Illy's friend, Jonas, a man who knew the desert's cruelty almost as well as he knew Illy's stubborn heart, had warned him before. The chief will come for them. If he finds them here, war will follow. You're risking everything. But risk had become a language Illy understood, a rhythm he could not ignore. Compassion, he realized, demanded recklessness when the innocent trembled beneath the weight of the world. Illy pulled a coarse blanket around the giants, their massive forms folded carefully, impossibly, into the cramped cellar. He lit a small lantern, its amber glow casting flickering shadows that softened the edges of fear. Taya's fingers brushed his hand again, a subtle gesture that carried trust without words. Nara leaned closer to her sister, the faintest hint of relief passing between them, as if the cellar's low ceiling and earthen walls could shield not just bodies but hope itself. Alone under the stars, Illy stepped outside, inhaling the desert air, dry and sharp, carrying scents of sagebrush, scorched earth, and distant smoke. The sky stretched infinite above him, and he felt the weight of every choice he had ever made pressing against his chest. To protect these giants was to invite danger, to stake his life against the desert's indifferent law. And yet, as the wind stirred the brim of his hat and brushed against his sun-darkened face, he felt something older, deeper, stirring within him courage tempered by mercy. He whispered a prayer not for himself, but for those he had taken under his care, for the giants who had survived what no one should survive, for the hope that one man's choice might ripple beyond the boundaries of fear and cruelty. Somewhere beyond the dunes, the flicker of distant fires hinted at eyes watching, waiting. Yet in this moment, under the infinite sweep of night and the gentle hum of the desert, Illy knew what he had to do. He would not turn away. He would not hide in silence while injustice marched. Beneath the stars, amidst shadow and wind, he chose compassion over fear. He sealed his fate quietly, a vow whispered to the night. I will protect you, no matter the cost. The desert listened, patient and eternal, and the night folded over the barn, holding them all in its vast, watchful silence. Inside the cellar, shadows clung to the rough, hewn walls, twisting with the flicker of Illy's lantern. Taya and Nara huddled close, their immense forms folding awkwardly in the cramped space, yet their presence was steady, alive, defiant in its quiet power. Every sound from above the creak of the barn, the whisper of wind through the cracks made them flinch, a reminder that the world outside had not yet forgiven them, had not yet forgotten the cruelty that chased them across the desert. Illy moved between them with deliberate care, brushing stray strands of hair from their faces, offering water and the faint warmth of reassurance. He spoke nothing, words would only falter under the weight of this night. Instead, his presence was the promise unwavering, patient, unyielding. Slowly, the giants' breathing evened, their tense muscles relaxing in small, imperceptible shifts. Trust, fragile as dew on desert grass, began to root itself in the silence. Above, the wind rose in sudden gusts, rattling the barn's roof and shaking loose dry debris. Illy glanced upward, knowing Jonas's warning would prove true. The chief's scouts could be near, the desert alive with eyes and whispers. He felt the tension coil around him, tight as a lasso, yet he did not waver. Mercy demanded courage, and courage demanded action, even when the cost was unknown, even when the world threatened to crush him for his choice. He knelt beside Taya, tracing gentle patterns on her massive forearm, noticing symbols etched into her skin, markings foreign and deliberate, stories carved into flesh by hands older than any man's memory. Nara shifted, and he saw similar signs, intricate and solemn. A realization settled over him, heavy and profound. These were not merely wanderers, not merely survivors. They were heirs, guardians of a lineage ancient and sacred. The weight of their lives pressed against him, a responsibility larger than any desert, any danger, any fear. Illy drew a deep breath, the air thick with dust, and the faint tang of rain from distant storms. He whispered to the giants, not for them to understand, but for himself, I will keep you safe, no matter what comes. And though the cellar was small, suffocating even, the promise hung like a banner against the darkness, a testament to the courage born in quiet moments when the world demanded surrender. Hours passed, the desert night stretching endlessly above, and Illy stayed vigilant. Every distant howl, every flicker of shadow outside, reminded him that the choice he had made would not go unnoticed. Yet within this hidden chamber, amidst the muted warmth of lantern light and the fragile trust of two colossal sisters, he allowed himself the smallest flicker of hope. He would face whatever came, the chief, the hunters, the wrath of men, for these women had survived the impossible, and he could not turn his back now. Outside, the stars spun their eternal path, indifferent yet watchful, and Illy Mercer, weary, battered, and yet unbroken, understood the truth of the desert. Mercy is a gamble, courage its only currency, and the night will always remember those who choose the path others fear to tread. The dawn bled pale gold across the desert, brushing the barn and its hidden cellar with fragile light. Dust hung in the air, suspended like tiny ghosts, and the world beyond the wooden walls seemed both infinite and menacing. Illy Mercer moved silently among the giants, tending to Taya's wounds, the coarse cloth pressing gently against sunburned skin, smoothing away grime and sand that clung stubbornly. Nara watched him, her eyes wary but unblinking, muscles tense like coiled springs, every gesture measured. As his fingers traced the scratches and bruises, Illy's attention caught on the strange symbols etched into their skin. Not scars of injury, but deliberate markings, intricate designs that spoke of lineage, of rank, of stories older than the desert itself. They curved along shoulders and arms, patterns that shimmered faintly in the morning light, like the memory of fire across bronze. Something ancient hummed beneath his fingers, a resonance that made his chest tighten with awe and unease. He leaned closer, studying the marks as though they might reveal a map, a secret, a key to understanding. And then it clicked. These were not merely survivors, nor wandering giants. They were royalty in a forgotten sense, protectors of lands and legacies that few outside their tribe could comprehend. The weight of this revelation pressed against Illy's ribs, heavier than any cattle he had ever driven, heavier than the losses that had haunted him for decades. He had sheltered not just fugitives, but heirs of a lineage whose story had been nearly erased. Outside, the town stirred with suspicion. Rumors, whispered with the subtle malice of men who measure life by fear, began to curl through the streets, the ranchers harboring monsters. The desert has delivered them into his hands. What trickery is this? Illy heard the murmurs in fleeting glances, the shadow of judgment lurking in every corner, every doorway. He knew that kindness in these parts was often mistaken for weakness, mercy mistaken for folly. And yet the giants lay beneath his care, oblivious to the growing storm beyond the barn doors, trusting him without words, without guarantee. Illy's hands lingered on Taya's arm a moment longer, feeling the pulse of life beneath the etched lines. He realized that these symbols carried not only history but power, a power that might make enemies tremble, that might provoke greed, fear, or bloodshed. The desert's harsh silence seemed to whisper around him, carrying both warning and possibility. He understood then that protection was no longer a matter of simple survival. It was a mantle, a vow that could summon danger in forms both mortal and unseen. The barn door creaked under a sudden gust of wind, dust swirling in amber shafts of light, and Illy's heart tightened. He scanned the horizon from the narrow cracks in the boards, eyes narrowing at distant silhouettes that moved like dark shadows against the dunes. Men were circling, drawn by rumor, by curiosity, by the hunger for power that had claimed more than a few in these harsh lands. Illy turned back to the giants kneeling beside them, feeling the immense gravity of responsibility settle like sand in his chest. He whispered softly, though they could not understand, "You are safe here. I will not fail you." His voice was low, steady, carrying the promise of courage forged in solitude, tempered by mercy. And somewhere beyond the dust-streaked horizon, the desert waited, patient, knowing that the choices made in these moments would ripple outward, stirring forces that few could predict and fewer could control. The day stretched long and heavy, the air shimmering with heat and tension. Illy Mercer, worn by years of loss yet driven by a heart that refused surrender, prepared himself for what was coming. For in the desert, secrets beneath the dust rarely remain hidden for long, and the world beyond his barn had begun to watch. The afternoon sun struck the desert like fire, burning the earth into shimmer and haze. Dust swirled through the ranch, caught in shafts of light that spilled through cracks in the barn. Illy Mercer moved among the giants with meticulous care, tending to their wounds, adjusting blankets, and ensuring the cellar remained hidden from prying eyes. Yet the world beyond the barn had begun to stir, restless and unforgiving. Rumors, once whispers, had become murmurs carried on the wind. The Mercer Ranch harbors monsters. He hides giants in his barn. Men with greed and curiosity in their eyes began to circle, their footsteps muffled by sand, but their intent clear. Illy sensed them before he saw them, a shadow moving along the horizon, a horse pausing just beyond the dunes, the faint glint of steel catching the sun. He crouched beside Taya, examining the intricate symbols on her arms, tracing their shapes as if seeking guidance from the ancient marks. They spoke of authority, of sacred lineage, of protection, and Illy knew that these symbols, if discovered, could provoke more than mere curiosity. They could summon violence, a reckoning fueled by fear, envy, and the harsh code of men who believed power belonged only to those who could seize it. Outside, voices rose in low, tense tones, carried across the desert like a gathering storm. The men had come, drawn by rumor and the promise of conquest. Illy's chest tightened, a familiar weight pressing down from years of battles fought and lost. He had survived desert heat, betrayal, and grief, but this challenge was different. These giants were not merely flesh and bone, they were a legacy, a living testament to a history the world had tried to erase. And he was the only one standing between them and the desert's merciless judgment. Taya stirred, sensing the tension in the air, and Nara's hands clenched instinctively, her body taut with readiness. Illy whispered reassurances in quiet tones, gestures patient and deliberate, though he knew they could not understand fully. His mind raced, weighing options, calculating risks. Every instinct screamed caution, yet his heart demanded action. Mercy was no longer passive. It required defiance, courage, and an unflinching commitment to protect the innocent. The first horseman appeared over the crest of the dunes, shadows tall and deliberate against the heat, hazed horizon. They slowed as they approached the barn, scanning the terrain with eyes sharpened by suspicion and avarice. Illy stood in the doorway, hands steady on the old wooden frame, facing them with the resolve of a man who had long since learned that survival alone was not enough. Compassion, he knew, must be defended, even when the world offered only threats in return. The men dismounted, dust rising in clouds around their boots. They spoke in low, threatening tones, demanding that Illy surrender the giants. Their voices carried authority, greed, and the expectation of obedience. Illy's gaze swept the barn, resting on the fragile forms of Taya and Nara, and he made his choice with absolute clarity. No plea, no threat, no force would break the bond he had sworn to protect. His voice, low and steady, cut through the simmering tension. They will not leave this place, not today, not ever. The words hung in the air like a challenge, carrying the weight of every loss, every scar, every quiet act of defiance that had shaped him. The men laughed bitter and harsh, misjudging the strength that lay not in muscle or steel, but in courage and moral certainty. Illy felt the air shift, heavy with the promise of violence, yet beneath it pulsed a new current, the power of mercy, of protection, of a choice made against the world's cruelty. As the sun dipped lower, casting long, jagged shadows across the dust-choked land, Illy Mercer prepared himself. He knew that the peace within the barn was fragile, that the desert beyond would not forgive his defiance. Yet in the quiet understanding shared between him and the giants, he found a fierce clarity. Some debts, some lives, some legacies must be defended at all costs. And so, with the dust swirling around his boots and the horizon burning with heat and anticipation, the first confrontation began, a test of courage, honor, and the unyielding will of a man who had chosen to protect what the world sought to destroy. The sun climbed high, burning the desert sky into a searing blue, casting long, wavering shadows over the parched earth. Dust rose in restless spirals as men on horseback approached the barn, the glint of gun barrels shimmering in the heat, hazed light. Illy Mercer stood firm at the doorway, a weathered silhouette of defiance, his eyes narrowed, hands loose at his sides but ready, as if every scar on his body remembered 1,000 battles fought and survived. The first words cut through the air, sharp as the crack of a rifle. Demands, threats, insults, the language of men who measure worth by violence. Ili's voice, low and unwavering, carried over the dust and wind. They will not leave, not today, not ever. The giant stirred behind him, Tear rising slowly from the hay. Her towering frame coiled like a spring, Nara beside her, muscles taut, eyes burning with quiet fury. The posse hesitated, underestimating the enormity of what they faced. And then it came the first shot. The sound tore through the air, hot metal screaming, dust rising like smoke from hell. Ili ducked instinctively, rolling behind a stack of hay bales as bullets slammed against timber, splintering wood in jagged showers. The air became thick with heat, tension, and the scent of gunpowder, the world narrowing to the rhythm of heartbeats and the relentless echo of violence. Taya moved like a force of nature, her immense body lunging forward, shielding Ili with a speed and strength impossible to predict. She grabbed one of the attackers, a man twice her size, in disbelief, and hurled him as if he were a rag doll. Dust and sweat flew, metal clashed, and screams echoed across the barnyard. Inara followed, her own movements precise, calculated, each gesture a lesson in power and survival honed by years of terror and necessity. Ili's hands found rifles, pistols, anything to defend. But he realized quickly that the giants were more than protectors. They were avengers born from the desert itself. Each motion of their bodies seemed to rewrite the rules of the world, bending the natural order with sheer will and determination. The posse's confidence faltered as the ground itself seemed to rebel, dust and sand twisting underfoot, a silent witness to the unfolding reckoning. From beyond the barn, scouts of the tribe watched distant figures etched against the horizon like shadows on fire. Their eyes were wide with astonishment, recognizing the strength of their kin and the courage of the man who had dared to shelter them. The desert held its breath, as if the wind itself had stopped to witness this unfolding justice. Blood stained the earth, and sweat mingled with dust in a haze that wrapped the barn in a living, breathing chaos. Yet, amidst the violence, Ili's resolve did not waver. Each movement of the giants, each calculated strike, reinforced the bond between them, a silent testament that mercy, when defended, could be as powerful as vengeance. By the time the sun reached its zenith, the attackers lay scattered, broken by their own arrogance and the raw, terrifying strength of those they sought to harm. Taya and Nara stood tall, their breathing even, eyes fierce and unwavering, shadows of giants against the blazing heat. Ili wiped sweat from his brow, chest heaving, and knew with unshakable certainty. The desert had witnessed courage today, but this was only the beginning. The chief would soon learn of the blood spilled, and with that knowledge would come a reckoning unlike any the world had yet seen. And as the wind swept through the scorched barnyard, carrying the scent of blood, dust, and iron, Ili Mercer felt the weight of destiny settle over him. War was coming, and the choice to protect mercy would demand everything he had, body, heart, and soul. The barnyard lay in smoldering silence, dust settling over splintered wood, trampled hay, and the bodies of men who had underestimated the desert's will. Ili Mercer's chest rose and fell with ragged determination, sweat stinging his eyes as he scanned the aftermath. Taya and Nara stood beside him, immense and formidable, their towering silhouettes framed by shafts of sun-scorched light. Every breath they drew was measured, powerful, yet beneath it flickered the fragile remnants of fear, the echoes of a world that had sought to destroy them. The attackers groaned and scrambled, realizing too late that their greed had summoned forces they could not control. Broken limbs, torn clothing, and the unmistakable fear in their eyes bore testament to the desert's harsh justice. Ili knelt beside the giants briefly, brushing sand from their massive limbs, offering gestures of reassurance that words could never carry. Their eyes met his, a silent understanding passing between them. The bond forged in mercy had been tested, and it had held. From the horizon, shadows of the tribe's scouts moved with quiet precision, watching every motion, every detail, every life spared and every life taken. They had witnessed the giant's strength, the courage of the man who had dared to protect them, and the desert itself seemed to hum with the resonance of choices made against impossible odds. Illy knew the chief would hear of this, would see the aftermath, and would decide with fire in his heart who deserved justice and who had earned vengeance. The barn, once a sanctuary, now smelled of sweat, iron, and the raw, metallic taste of survival. Taya's hand rested briefly on Illy's arm, massive fingers curled like protective talons, a gesture as delicate as it was fierce. Nara mirrored her sister, the two of them united not only by blood, but by the understanding that the man beside them had risked everything. The weight of gratitude was heavy, unspoken, yet it pressed against the heat of the day with the force of desert wind. Illy wiped a streak of blood from his brow, scanning the horizon where dust rose from the retreating figures of the defeated men. His mind raced, calculating the inevitable: the chief's arrival, the warriors who would follow, the reckoning that would demand more than courage alone, and yet, amidst the tension, a fierce pride swelled within him. Mercy had been defended, compassion had not faltered, and in that choice he had carved a space in the desert where hope could still breathe, fragile though it might be. The giants stepped forward, their immense forms moving with deliberate grace, surveying the barnyard as if claiming it as a bastion of protection, a testament to the power of will guided by purpose. Illy's heart tightened at the sight, aware that this confrontation was only the opening act of a larger storm yet to come. The desert would remember today, and it would carry the tale to the ears of Grey Hawk, the chief whose wrath was as legendary as the sands themselves. As the sun reached its zenith, the air shimmered with heat and tension, carrying the scent of sweat, blood, and impending conflict. Illy Mercer stood amidst the giants, dust swirling at his boots, and knew that the next choice, the one that would confront honor, vengeance, and mercy in equal measure, was approaching with the inevitability of the desert sun. War was no longer a threat on the horizon. It was moving closer, and the decision of a single man had become the fulcrum upon which lives, legacies, and destinies would balance. The wind rose again, carrying distant echoes of hooves and voices, a warning and a promise entwined. Illy tightened his jaw, squared his shoulders, and embraced the truth of what he had begun. Once mercy is defended, the world will demand reckoning, and he would face it, not with fear, but with the unyielding courage that had carried him this far. The horizon burned with the first thin streaks of dawn, the desert stretching endless and unforgiving under a sky caught between night and day. Illy Mercer stood atop a small rise overlooking his ranch, his shadow long and jagged against the cracked earth. The wind carried the faint scent of sage and distant smoke, and in its whispering currents he felt it the approach of destiny, inevitable and relentless. From the far dunes silhouettes began to appear, riders forming like dark specters against the pale light. 2, 5, 20, and then hundreds, moving as one, a tide of resolve that did not falter. Dust rose in great clouds, eddies swirling around hooves, reflecting the fiery hues of the awakening sun. Illy's heart tightened, not with fear, but with the weight of what was to come. Grey Hawk, the chief whose name alone commanded obedience and dread, was riding toward him, and with him the full might of his warriors. The giants, Taya and Nara, emerged from the barn, their immense forms casting long shadows across the courtyard. They did not flinch, did not falter. Their gaze swept the horizon, measuring the number of riders, the cadence of hooves, the wind's direction. Illy could feel their silent communication, the unspoken understanding that they had survived massacres before and would survive this as well, but the risk was greater now, the stakes unimaginable. The first warrior reached the edge of the property, halting with a precision that spoke of training, discipline, and unwavering loyalty. And then another and another, until the full scale of the chief's presence became undeniable. 200 warriors, their silhouettes rigid and formidable, forming a living wall of authority and vengeance. Dust and sun shimmered together in a harsh, blinding glare, and Illy's breath caught in his throat, not from fear, but from the enormity of the moment. Grey Hawk rode forward, alone, his figure framed by the rising sun. His eyes burned with intensity, dark and piercing, reflecting a lifetime of grief, anger, and duty. The desert seemed to hold its breath, the wind ceasing its restless whispers, the earth itself pausing to witness the confrontation. Illy met the chief's gaze, unflinching, chest heaving, arms ready not only to defend but to uphold the promise he had made beneath the stars. Silence stretched taut between them, a living force heavier than any weapon. The warriors behind Grey Hawk remained motionless, yet the tension hummed like a wire pulled to its limit. Each second carried the weight of countless choices, mercy and vengeance poised on a knife's edge. Illy's eyes shifted briefly to Taya and Nara, their massive forms standing proud and unyielding, a testament to survival and the bond forged in a night of defiance. The desert seemed to pulse with anticipation, every grain of sand vibrating with the rhythm of hearts poised for confrontation. Illy stepped forward, unarmed but resolute, feeling the presence of the giants behind him, their strength a living shield. He could not flee, could not bargain, could not cower. The path forward was clear. Honor, courage, and truth would be his weapons, and he would wield them against the fury of a chief whose justice was absolute. And as the sun rose fully, spilling golden fire across the blood-stained earth of the barnyard, Grey Hawk halted his mount mere paces away, the warriors forming a circle that pressed the world into a narrow, tense moment. Illy Mercer, battered but unbroken, knew that the next words, the next gestures, the next choice, would not only determine his fate but define the legacy of mercy, courage, and the bond between man and giants that had begun in the desert's unforgiving sands. The desert watched, the wind held its breath, and in that moment a reckoning, silent and inevitable, prepared to unfold. Grey Hawk dismounted with the precision of a man who had walked through countless storms of blood and desert dust. His eyes, sharp as obsidian, scanned the barnyard, taking in the scattered remnants of yesterday's violence. The warriors behind him shifted subtly, a silent testament to discipline and loyalty, their presence both a warning and a promise. Justice would come, whether by mercy or by steel. Illy Mercer stepped forward, every muscle taut, every heartbeat echoing in his ears like the drums of an approaching storm. Behind him, Taya and Nara rose taller, shoulders squared, eyes fierce and unyielding. Their immense forms seemed to draw the very light around them, bending it into a quiet halo of power and defiance. Illy felt the gravity of their presence not as protectors alone, but as witnesses of truth, living proof that mercy could stand firm against vengeance. Grey Hawk's voice cut through the tension, low and commanding, carrying the weight of centuries of law and blood. You sheltered them, you defied the desert, and you expect my forgiveness. His eyes, dark and unflinching, settled on Illy, probing for weakness, seeking the cracks in courage where death might slip in. Illy's gaze held firm, steady, unwavering, a silent answer louder than any words could convey. The giants stepped forward, moving in unison, their shadows stretching long and proud across the barnyard. Taya raised her hand, massive and deliberate, pointing to the wounds they had suffered, to the mercy that had been given without hesitation. Nara mirrored her sister, the markings etched along her arms catching the sunlight, symbols of lineage and truth that spoke louder than any plea, louder than any threat. Grey Hawk's eyes widened slightly, recognition flashing across his features. He saw what Illy had seen hours ago, the marks of the giant clan, the sacred lineage of protectors who had survived massacres and the cruelty of men. The fury in his eyes flickered, replaced by the weight of realization. The rage that had driven him to this moment met the undeniable truth of honor, courage, and the man who had risked everything to protect what was sacred. For a long, suspended heartbeat, silence reigned. The warriors shifted uneasily, sensing the shift in the air, the collapse of expectation into awe and respect. The desert itself seemed to still, every grain of sand holding its breath, every wind gust hushed in reverence for the moment unfolding beneath the golden sun. Then Grey Hawk did something no one expected. He stepped closer, kneeling slowly before Illy, the gesture deliberate, unhurried, heavy with meaning. "You are my blood brother now," he said, voice low, reverent, carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken promises. "You have honored the sacred law of mercy, and in doing so you have earned the protection of my tribe." The barnyard seemed to exhale, the tension melting into a cautious relief. The warriors, once poised for battle, bowed their heads, acknowledging the bond forged not by blood alone, but by courage and compassion. Illy stood, humbled and astonished, as Taya and Nara watched, their expressions softened by gratitude yet still fierce with the knowledge of survival and legacy. In that golden morning light, the desert felt alive with possibility. The attackers who had sought violence were handed over for justice, their greed and malice tempered by the authority of the tribe. And for Illy Mercer, the man who had chosen mercy over fear, the impossible had been realized. The desert, ever harsh and unforgiving, had borne witness to honor, courage, and the profound truth that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion could reshape the course of history. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the barnyard and the surrounding dunes, Illy looked to the horizon, feeling the pulse of the desert beneath his boots. The giant stood beside him, proud and unbowed, and for the first time in years he allowed himself a quiet, fragile sense of peace. War had been averted, justice upheld, and the bonds of mercy forged stronger than any sword. The desert, vast and eternal, whispered through the dunes, carrying the story of courage and compassion across its endless sands, ensuring that those who walked its paths would remember some debts are repaid not with blood, but with the courage to stand when the world demands surrender. The first rays of dawn cut through heavy clouds like molten gold spilling across the desert, washing the barnyard in a light both fierce and tender. Rain, sparse and irregular, fell in gentle sheets, hissing softly as it kissed the dust, stained earth carrying the scent of iron and sand. Illy Mercer stood amidst the remnants of yesterday's struggle, the barn behind him scarred but steadfast, the giant's massive forms beside him, silent and alert. Grey Hawk remained at the center of the clearing, the chief's eyes scanning every scar, every mark of survival etched into Taya and Nara. The wind tugged at his hair and clothes, carrying the whispered story of what had transpired, the mercy granted, the courage displayed, the blood spilled in defense of honor. There was no fury left in his gaze, only the weight of judgment tempered by recognition. He had come to punish, and instead he found truth. The giants spoke then, their voices low but clear, carrying across the barnyard like the tolling of a bell. They recounted every act of mercy, every risk Illy had taken, each moment where he could have fled but chose to stand, to shield them with nothing but heart and determination. The desert seemed to lean closer, listening, holding its breath, as the chief absorbed each word, each gesture, each proof of courage that no man could fabricate. Illy's hands were steady, his voice calm as he added the small, simple truths the hours spent tending wounds, the threats faced alone, the quiet moments beneath the stars when the weight of choice pressed heavier than any blade. He said nothing of the fear, of the years of loss that had hardened him, for such things were unnecessary. His actions spoke louder than any confession, louder than the thunder rolling softly across distant hills. Grey Hawk's eyes softened just slightly as understanding settled in. The rage that had driven him across the desert melted into the recognition that the man before him was not an enemy, but a protector, a man who had walked the fine line between survival and honor and chosen the path of mercy. The warriors behind him shifted, their hands easing from weapons, their postures relaxing with the weight of this new reality. Then, in a motion that seemed to still the desert itself, Grey Hawk lowered to one knee before Illy, the gesture deliberate, solemn, and impossible to ignore. "You have honored us when the world would have cast us aside," he intoned, voice low, carrying across the rain-slicked earth. "You have become my blood brother. From this day you are protector, ally, and witness to the legacy of my daughters and my people." Illy's heart throbbed with quiet disbelief. He had faced storms, raiders, and desert heat, but nothing had prepared him for this, the recognition of courage, the forging of alliance, the merging of worlds in a single, unbreakable vow. Taya and Nara stepped forward, towering and proud, their eyes meeting Grey Hawk's in a silent testament to survival, resilience, and the promise of future peace. The rain fell harder now, hissing against boots and earth, washing away the dust and blood of yesterday, mingling with the scent of sage and wet sand. The desert seemed to exhale, forgiving what had been, blessing what was now, and signaling that the reckoning had passed without the ruin of unnecessary bloodshed. Even the warriors, disciplined and fierce, could not hide the awe that softened their rigid expressions, the understanding that a new era had begun at Illy Mercer's hands. And in that golden, rain-streaked morning, Illy realized the truth that had carried him across dunes, through loss and struggle. Sometimes the most shocking decisions are not born from anger or fear, but from the courage to do what is right, even when the world expects otherwise. The desert held its silence, heavy and eternal, as the alliance formed in its heart a bond stronger than blood, forged in mercy, courage, and unyielding honor. Illy Mercer felt the pulse of it beneath his boots, the weight of destiny settling like sand over every scar, every wound, every victory that had brought him to this moment. The rain had begun to taper, leaving the desert air sharp and fragrant, a mixture of wet sand, sage, and iron. The earth glistened, blood mingled with water, yet there was a sense of cleansing, a rebirth carried on each drop. Illy Mercer stood tall, shoulders squared, as Grey Hawk rose from his kneel and extended his hand, an unspoken promise sealed by the bond of honor. The giants, Taya and Nara, flanked him, their immense forms casting long shadows across the wet ground, silent guardians of a fragile, hard, one piece. The warriors watched, their eyes still wary but softened by the undeniable truth of the moment. The men who had attacked days before those who had sought greed, blood, and spectacle were brought forward, trembling beneath the weight of tribal authority. Grey Hawk's voice rang out, low and commanding, carrying across the desert like rolling thunder. "Justice shall be done. The innocent are protected, and the guilty shall answer for their deeds." The attackers lowered their heads, unable to meet the fierce gaze of both the chief and the giants. The desert seemed to lean in closer, as if bearing witness, its wind carrying every word, every gesture, every ripple of consequence. Illy's chest swelled with quiet relief. Mercy had been defended, honor restored, and yet there was no triumphal celebration, only the steady, unyielding recognition that the world had shifted slightly, irrevocably, by courage and compassion. Taya and Nara stepped forward, their voices echoing like wind over dunes. They spoke not with malice, but with authority, recounting the mercy shown, the protection offered, the unwavering courage of Illy Mercer. Each word landed like a hammer on truth, leaving no room for doubt or deceit. Grey Hawk listened, every syllable confirming what his eyes had already witnessed, what his heart had begun to understand. Illy was no ordinary man. He was a guardian, a protector, a blood brother not just in name, but in the essence of his actions. As the sun rose fully, golden light breaking through the dissipating clouds, Grey Hawk declared the judgment. The men who had attacked were stripped of claim, their greed nullified, and they were made to swear loyalty and atonement to the tribe. Their threat extinguished, the desert exhaled, and the tension that had gripped the land for days dissipated like morning mist. The alliance between Ili and the tribe was sealed, unbreakable, a testament to the extraordinary power of choice in a world governed by harsh rules and harsher men. Ili watched the giants, their immense forms proud and unyielding, and felt a quiet awe settle in his chest. They were more than survivors. They were living proof that mercy, when defended, could transform fear into respect, enmity into loyalty, and the impossible into reality. Grey Hawk's presence, once a harbinger of vengeance, now stood as a symbol of honor and recognition. The desert itself bearing witness to the truth that courage and compassion, when intertwined, could reshape the course of history. The barnyard, once scarred by bullets and blood, now held the promise of peace. Rain glistened on wood and dust, washing away yesterday's violence and leaving behind the quiet strength of redemption. The giants moved with deliberate grace, surveying the territory, yet their expressions softened, reflecting a sense of home, of trust, of bonds forged not through power alone but through the rarest courage, the courage to protect what is right, no matter the cost. Ili Mercer stood among them, wet hair plastered to his forehead, chest heaving, eyes scanning the horizon. The desert, harsh and eternal, had whispered its approval, carrying the story forward across dunes and canyons, ensuring that all who would listen would understand. The man who chose mercy over fear, who protected the helpless against overwhelming odds, had earned a place not only in the tribe's heart but in the desert's timeless memory, and in that golden ring. Kissed morning, a fragile, fierce peace settled over the land. The alliance was real, the debt repaid, and the desert, ever watchful, held its breath in quiet reverence for a story of courage that would echo through its sands for generations to come. The desert awoke slowly, the morning mist curling over cracked soil like delicate fingers seeking life. Ili Mercer moved among the remnants of his ranch, each step stirring the earth and carrying the scent of wet dust and sage. The barn, once battered and scarred by conflict, now stood as a quiet sentinel, a testament to endurance and the fragile victory that had been won through courage, not force. Taya and Nara walked beside him, their immense frames cutting through the mist like statues of living stone. Every movement was measured, deliberate, a dance of strength and grace that seemed to harmonize with the desert itself. Their eyes, still sharp with the memory of recent violence, now held a flicker of peace, a reflection of the trust they had placed in the man who had sheltered them when the world sought only to destroy. Grey Hawk watched from a distance, silent and contemplative, the weight of his authority softened by gratitude and recognition. His warriors, once poised for vengeance, now worked alongside Ili and the giants, tending to fields, repairing fences, and clearing the debris left behind by greed and violence. Dust and sweat mingled, carrying a rhythm of unity and purpose, a new chapter in a land that had long known only hardship. Ili's hands, calloused from years of toil, brushed over the fertile soil beside the river where the tribe had chosen to settle. Together, they planted seeds of corn and beans, each one a promise of sustenance, survival, and hope. The giants, careful not to crush the fragile sprouts, moved with a grace that belied their size, their presence a reminder of both the power and the responsibility carried by those who survived. As the sun climbed higher, painting the riverbank in shades of gold and green, laughter returned to the land, not loud, not boisterous, but quiet, intimate, a sound that had not been heard for years within Ili's home. Children of the tribe, curious and cautious, ventured closer, eyes wide with wonder at the towering figures of Taya and Nara, and at the man who had risked his life to protect them. The bond between human and giants, once fragile and tentative, now grew stronger with every shared smile, every gesture of care, every whispered word of encouragement. Illy paused beside a newly carved trench for irrigation, the desert wind brushing across his face, and felt a profound sense of connection. The trials, the battles, the blood and dust all had led to this delicate harmony. For the first time in years, he sensed that the desert, vast and unyielding, was not just a place of hardship, but a canvas upon which courage, mercy, and honor could leave lasting marks. Taya bent down, her immense fingers brushing earth over a newly planted seed, and Nara followed, each motion precise, reverent. Illy watched, heart swelling with quiet pride, realizing that these moments, small, fragile, yet immeasurably powerful, were the true measure of survival. They were no longer merely defenders and survivors. They were builders, nurturers, and witnesses to a legacy born from mercy and courage. The river sparkled under the sun's climb, the water clear and singing, carrying whispers of distant mountains, of battles past, and of a future not yet written. Illy's eyes lifted to the horizon, where dunes rolled like sleeping giants, silent yet watchful. The desert had not forgotten, nor would it ever. It held every story, every act of courage, and now it bore witness to a bond that would endure long after footprints had faded into dust. And in that quiet, mist-laden morning, as Illy Mercer worked alongside giants and tribe alike, he understood the unspoken truth of the desert. Peace was fragile, honor was precious, and the bonds forged through compassion were stronger than any storm, stronger than any war, and destined to echo across the sands for generations to come. The sun had climbed higher, burning away the morning mist, and leaving the desert bathed in a soft, golden heat. Illy Mercer moved among the tribe, watching as Taya and Nara guided the children in the careful planting of new crops, their immense forms gentle yet commanding. Every step they took pressed life into the earth, a quiet reminder that strength paired with care could cultivate more than survival, it could create legacy. The ranch, once scarred and shattered, now buzzed with quiet activity. Warriors repaired fences, tended livestock, and shared knowledge of hunting and rivercraft with Illy, who welcomed their guidance with humility. Laughter echoed across the plains, tentative at first, like water trickling into dry soil, but gradually growing into a melody of trust and kinship. Illy felt it in his chest, a warmth he had not known since the loss of his family, a fragile hope that the desert could, perhaps, be tamed not with violence, but with the quiet labor of hearts aligned. In the center of the yard, Taya and Nara worked side by side with Illy on a monument carved from sandstone, the task both solemn and reverent. Their hands, immense and skilled, etched the story of courage into the rock. A man, small in comparison to giants, standing unwavering in the face of cruelty. The desert stretched around him, endless and unforgiving, yet witness to his mercy. Each chisel strike rang out like a heartbeat, marking the rhythm of survival, honor, and gratitude. As the monument took shape, warriors and townsfolk alike gathered to watch, awed by the magnitude of the gesture. Illy stepped back, the dust settling on his boots, sweat streaking his sunburned face, and he realized that this was more than a tribute, it was a bridge between worlds, a testament to what could be achieved when courage and compassion walked hand in hand. The giants, silent as stone sentinels, flanked the figure of the man they had come to trust, their presence both protective and proud. Children ran around the sandstone effigy, their laughter carrying across the plains, unafraid and free. The tribe had found a rhythm with Illy, one built on respect and shared purpose, rather than fear and obedience. The bonds that had been forged in fire, blood, and desert dust now held firm in the quiet toil of rebuilding. The desert itself seemed to pulse with approval, the wind carrying whispers of gratitude across the dunes, reminding all who wandered that bravery and mercy could leave marks stronger than stone. Illy gazed toward the horizon, where the dunes rolled endlessly, their silent forms holding secrets of countless generations. The desert could be harsh, unforgiving, and relentless, but it also bore witness to honor and courage. He knew peace was fragile, a fleeting dream easily reclaimed by the unforgiving sands. Yet he felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that for a time he had stood tall, defended mercy, and helped shape a sanctuary that could endure beyond the reach of cruelty. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the sand and the newly carved monument, Illy Mercer allowed himself a rare moment of quiet reflection. The giants beside him, the tribe thriving, and the desert stretching vast and eternal all bore witness to the truth he had long carried. Courage and compassion, when acted upon, could reshape destinies and echo across time, leaving a legacy stronger than fear, greater than vengeance, and more enduring than any storm the desert could muster. The wind whispered through the plains, carrying the story of a man, two giants, and a tribe that had survived the impossible. And though the desert would continue to test them, its vastness no longer seemed empty. It was alive with the bonds forged in mercy, the echoes of bravery, and the promise of hope stretching into the horizon. The sun hung low over the desert, bleeding shades of amber and violet across the horizon, and the wind carried a song of silence, soft yet unbroken. Illy Mercer stood atop the gentle rise overlooking the ranch, now thriving under the careful hands of the tribe and the giants, Taya and Nara. The fields, once barren and scorched, shimmered with green shoots, each one a testament to survival, resilience, and the quiet labor of courage. Years had passed since the confrontation that had tested the mettle of man and giants alike. The barn, rebuilt with weathered timber and steadfast resolve, bore witness to laughter and toil, its walls holding stories of mercy defended and lives spared. Illy's face, lined with the sun and wind, carried a quiet serenity, a calm that had eluded him for decades. The desert, harsh and eternal, no longer seemed indifferent. It now hummed with the rhythm of lives intertwined, of trust forged in dust and danger, of bonds stronger than fear itself. Taya and Nara moved among the tribe, guiding children, teaching skills, and sharing wisdom learned from the sands and storms. Their immense presence had become a part of the desert's heartbeat, each movement deliberate yet graceful, each glance carrying reassurance, protection, and pride. Illy watched them, understanding that these giants were not merely survivors of the past, they were architects of a future where mercy could thrive alongside strength. Along the riverbank, the sandstone monument stood tall, faces carved in homage to bravery and honor. Men, women, and children paused before it, tracing the etched details, feeling the weight of history, courage, and compassion in each line. Illy had not built it alone. The giants' hands had shaped it, the tribe's hopes had guided it, and the desert itself had lent its solemn blessing. The monument was a declaration to all who would wander these lands. Courage, when tempered by mercy, could carve legacies more enduring than any conquest. The river's waters gleamed like molten silver beneath the descending sun, reflecting the silhouettes of the giants, the tribe, and the man who had walked through storms of blood and sand to protect what was sacred. Illy's gaze stretched toward the distant dunes, watching as shadows lengthened and merged, the desert breathing gently around him. The horizon, once a place of uncertainty and fear, now held the promise of peace, of stories carried forward by wind, sand, and time. Illy knelt briefly beside the river, letting his hands touch the water as if grounding himself in the life it carried. The years of loss, struggle, and solitude felt distant now, replaced by a quiet gratitude for the moments of courage that had led to this fragile harmony. The giants approached, their footsteps soft yet immense, and together they stood watching the sun dip lower, painting the world in colors both harsh and beautiful. And as twilight bled into the desert, Illy understood a truth the desert had always whispered, but he had only now fully heard. The smallest acts of mercy could ripple farther than vengeance ever could, carving bonds stronger than fear and leaving marks more lasting than blood. The horizon stretched endless, a canvas of possibility, and for the first time in decades, Illy Mercer allowed himself to breathe fully, knowing that the legacy of courage, honor, and mercy would endure long after the desert winds had erased footprints from the sand. Night settled slowly over the desert, drawing long shadows across the dunes and casting the river into silver and black. Illy Mercer stood on the ridge overlooking the ranch, the wind tugging at his coat and the scent of sage and earth filling his lungs. The giants, Taya and Nara, stood beside him like living monuments, their silhouettes immense against the twilight sky, guardians of a peace hard, earned and now enduring. The tribe moved quietly below, tending to fires, repairing homes, and sharing laughter that had returned like fragile sunlight after a long storm. Illy watched, heart swelling with a quiet pride. Every seed planted, every wall mended, every hand extended in trust was a testament to the power of mercy and courage intertwined. What had begun as a desperate choice under the harsh gaze of the desert sun had grown into a living, breathing legacy, a promise that compassion could survive even amidst cruelty. He turned his gaze to the horizon where the last rays of sun bled into violet and indigo, stretching far beyond the dunes into a world unseen. The desert's vastness seemed infinite, yet within it lay the evidence of change, footprints once left in haste, footprints of fear and blood, now replaced by those of care, labor, and honor. The wind carried their story, a whisper for travelers yet to come, for those who might one day stand where he had stood and wonder how courage could bend the course of fate. The sandstone monument near the river gleamed faintly in the moonlight, faces carved with reverence to a man who had dared to choose kindness when the world demanded cruelty. Taya and Nara's hands rested upon its surface, tracing the etched forms with respect and gratitude, and Illy felt the weight of generations settle gently upon him. His name, whispered among warriors and children alike, was no longer just a man who survived. It was a symbol, a reminder that even the smallest act of mercy could echo far beyond blood and time. As stars emerged, sparkling cold and brilliant above the desert, Illy felt a calm settle deep in his chest. The trials, the battles, the harsh lessons of the past all had culminated here, in this fragile, beautiful moment. The giants beside him, the tribe thriving, and the desert itself holding their stories close, formed a tapestry of life and honor, woven with threads of courage, trust, and compassion. Illy Mercer breathed in the desert night, the wind humming softly through canyon stones, carrying the memory of what had been and the promise of what could endure. For in a land where the sun burns truth from bone, where justice moves slow as rain, it is mercy quiet, steadfast, unyielding that rises taller than any giant, stronger than any storm. The horizon stretched eternal before him, a reminder that choices made with heart and honor leave marks the desert will never forget. And in that timeless expanse, the story of a man, two giants, and a tribe bound by courage whispered across the sands, echoing far beyond the reach of mortal sight. Even in the harshest lands, compassion can stand unbroken, shaping destiny, forging bonds, and carving a legacy that not even time can erase.